Welcome everyone to See Us Supporters Youth Team podcast. I am your host Samara, and I am joining me is our co-host Jada and Marley from our See Us Supporters Youth Team. See Us Support Us is an initiative that creates a community for young people who have had an incarcerated parent and raises awareness about our experiences and how to support us. We the youth team for SUSU are a group from across the country, and we have experienced parent incarceration, and we come together to s- have a nice talk, a podcast with everyone. And I will pass it over to Marley to share some stats.
Oh, I'm Marley Moon, and I am going to share some talking points. Did you know that the US incarcerates more people than any other country? 1 in 14 children have had an incarcerated parent. If we break down the numbers, we find that 1 in 4 Black children, 1 in 10 Latinx children, and 1 in 25 white children had an incarcerated parent at some point. That's because systemic racism results in more people of color being policed, arrested, and sentenced to serve time. 1 in 2 people in this country have a close family member who has been incarcerated. What do you think of these statistics?
Hi, my name is Jada and I'm the co-host. Every October is CS Support Us Month, and this year SUSU celebrates the 20th anniversary of Children of Incarcerated Parents Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights was created with young people who all had incarcerated parents, and these rights are not legally binding. But there are 8 rights that are important to them, and the 1 in 14 young people in this country like us who have had incarcerated parents during their childhood.
And to share with y'all, one of my favorite right that I like is number 7. I have the right not to be judged, blamed, or labeled because my parent is incarcerated. And this just resonates with me because growing up having an incarcerated parent, I felt different. And that difference doesn't change me or make me different from everyone else. Um, and having this right just lets youth know that we are not alone, and that because of this challenge that we have dealt with, it doesn't make us different in any way, shape, or form, and that we are worthy enough. We're not less than because of this as well. Jada and Marley, would y'all like to share one of y'all favorite rights and why?
My right is right number 3. I have the right to be considered when decisions are made about my parent. I think that right is very important because a lot of times when parents are taken and children are just left there to like technically fend for themselves until they're put into their foster care system, the child isn't really considered. They could have had an aunt, an uncle, a grandma who they wanted to stay with instead, but instead, since their parent is being incarcerated, they're thrown into the system, which is unfair. And another important decision we talked about at the panel we had on Monday in Brooklyn Borough Hall was bail reform, which is big to me because like one decision that the prison system makes is how much you're going to pay for bail. And as we see, like people who live in these urbanized cities or big cities like California and New York, Chicago, we don't have the money to be paying $500,000 for bail, especially when you have children that want to go to college or stuff like that. All that money could be going towards your child, but instead you're taking money away from a family for them to pay $500,000 bail knowing they don't have that, especially when it can be crimes that are minuscule. Thank you.
The right that I like and why is right number 6. I have the right to support as I face my parents' incarceration. At the time my father was arrested, I didn't know what was going on, and I was going through a lot already. And the stress of it just increased challenges I was having with my mental health. I was struggling with depression, and I ended up in the hospital because I just couldn't withstand the type of stress that it put me through. And I know a lot of kids, especially in these situations, are dealing with high anxiety and other challenges, and so we all deserve support. Thank you.
Yes, and today we have two special guests, LaTroya Lovell and Chesa Boudin. And would y'all like to give a brief introduction about yourselves and what you do? Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, no tech issues. Well, it's great to be with you all and really appreciate the introduction. My name is Chesa Boudin, as you mentioned, and I currently serve as the founding executive director of the Criminal Law and Justice Center at the University of California, Berkeley School of Law. We are a advocacy and research hub that works to connect students and researchers with real-world practitioners and to lift up the voices of directly impacted communities. Previously, I served as San Francisco's elected district attorney. I won that office on a decarceral platform committed to reducing reliance on incarceration. And before that, I worked as a public defender for many years in San Francisco, defending people, including many parents accused of committing crimes. I grew up impacted by parental incarceration myself. My biological parents spent a combined 62 years in New York State maximum security prison. And so my earliest memories are waiting in line to go see them, to get through metal detectors and searches, just to be able to give my parents a hug. And my earliest work around advocacy of any kind, way before I became a lawyer, was when I was still in middle school and high school, advocating on behalf of other children with incarcerated parents. So it's an issue that has been profoundly impactful on my own life and near and dear to my heart, an area, as I hope we'll get to talk about, that I continue to do work on today.
Thank you, Chesa. Hello, everyone. My name is LaTroya Lovell. I am a professor, an educator, and researcher working with both CUNY School of Professional Studies and the CUNY Graduate Center, specifically the Public Science Project. I'm a writer, and I have also 15 years of experience working with young people from all types of spaces. So I've worked with young people in public schools, in private schools, in nonprofit organizations. And where I'm currently landed is working with youth through different platforms and projects related to critical participatory action research and youth participatory action research. So currently I'm doing that and a lot of public policy work with young people. And I'm excited to be here. I've moved through all of these spaces with my lived experience in both the child welfare system, but also as someone who had an incarcerated parent in the Indiana State Penitentiary System for 12 years during my youth. So, yeah, I'm happy to be here and join the conversation with you all.
Yes, thank you for coming and being our special guest. And I'll start off our first question that we have for you is, how did you get involved with the work you do in advocacy? And what is your why? I know you kind of spoke a little bit about it, but just give us a bit more detail into your why as well.
This for me.
For both of you.
I can get us started. So a little bit about how I came into advocacy work. I was working with young people for most of my adult career. And at a point, I went into looking to get some formalized training within youth development. And I ended up in research really out of this general like frustration around research. So when I began reading a lot of the articles and the classes from my master's program, um, a lot of that research really claimed to explain that people like me, so kids who were from systems of poverty, or kids who had had incarcerated parents, or kids who had been impacted by various systems, that almost all of those articles had claimed that I had already failed. So those studies didn't really see the possibility of us as a group or demographic, but they really measured us in this really deficit, damage-based language. So they talked about what I was seeing myself in this research as like risk factors and that we had poor developmental outcomes, and we were really like disparate data points in a lot of this research. And I was thinking about, okay, like, what is the purpose of this? And I do remember asking myself in those early days of like my studies, like, how could I have failed if I'm here reading your work, I'm in partaking in your scholarship, and I'm pursuing my master's? So I think that question of how did I fail really became the doorway into my research work, and just thinking about how we could shift some of those failure frameworks to frameworks that didn't pathologize us, didn't write us from this deficit lens and model. And that's how I landed on critical participatory action research, because I was really um, drawn to this concept of what's the purpose of doing research if we have so much? How can we do research differently? How can we use it to shift the stories and the narratives around certain demographics in a certain groups of young people? And how can we, from there, use what we collect to shift policy and to do things differently and to make change within systems?
Yeah, I'll just say for me, I mean, it was really personal. It was growing up from the time I was 14 months old, being separated from my parents. They were both arrested when I was a baby. And, I don't remember the day that they were arrested. I don't remember the years they spent, in county jail fighting their case. I don't remember when they were convicted. And, when the judge sentenced my dad to 75 years to life, my mom to 20 years to life. Like my earliest memories are just trying to get in to prison gates to see them, and getting that invisible ink stamped on my hand, and seeing the razor wire and the big fences. And way before I understood that our system of mass incarceration is built on structural inequities, that it's built on institutionalized racism, before I understood what mass incarceration was, I started to notice that the lines to get through those metal detectors were mostly Black and brown women and children. And I noticed that this was a phenomenon that was disproportionately impacting certain communities that looked different than myself. Um, and I started to recognize the privilege that I had and all the supports that I had navigating the trauma of parental incarceration. We're going to talk about this today, and we've all lived through it on this call, but having your parents taken away and put in a cage wreaks havoc on you as a young child. I, like so many millions of American children who experienced parental incarceration, felt stigma and anger and shame and guilt, and felt like maybe I should have done something to prevent this tragedy. And it took a lot of support for me to navigate all of that baggage. And I was lucky to have that support. And I started to realize that most other kids, too many other kids with incarcerated parents, weren't as lucky as I was and didn't have the kind of supports that they needed. And I realized that actually we should just have fewer parents in prison in the first place. We should stop doing this damage, and we should find more effective ways to intervene and talk about accountability when people cause harm, rather than creating this intergenerational cycle. So I started doing work first as a youth advocate, and then eventually as a researcher, and then as a lawyer, and then as a politician, and it comes full circle. So that's kind of my path to this work. It's very personal.
And just like a follow-up question for you, Chesa, what advocacy did you do to advance in like the steps of the Bill of Rights?
Well, so one of the things that we saw before the Bill of Rights existed, I was out there with folks like Imani Davis and her mother Liz Gaines, who ran the Osborne Association for many years. And Imani and I were out when I was in middle school, high school, speaking to groups of people working with incarcerated parents, working with children of incarcerated parents, groups like the Child Welfare League of America, associations of probation and parole officers, foster parent associations. And we were really trying to drive home the experience of having an incarcerated parent, and trying to help people think about best practices, uplifting and humanizing children, and parents, frankly, who have been through incarceration. And it was really out of that work that so many of the ideas behind the Bill of Rights came to be. And I don't want to take credit. I think other folks, Imani and Liz and others in this space did far more than I did to really get the Bill of Rights out there and across the finish line. But it came from a recognition that there wasn't even a framework to talk to people, well-intentioned people in many cases, people signing up to be foster parents for children who, both of whose parents were locked up. And they didn't really understand how to think about empowering and centering children's needs. And so that's really where the Bill of Rights, conversation started. And I think it's been a critically important tool, both for helping children with incarcerated parents understand their rights, and advocacy on their own behalf, but also for working with professionals and foster parents and others who are trying to do the right thing, but maybe haven't until the Bill of Rights had the right framework for thinking about it.
Yes, and speaking of the Bill of Rights, what rights stand out to you the most? And yeah, what rights stand out to you the most and why?
I would say for me, I mean, all of them are important. That's why they're in there. But I would say that the right to a relationship, with my parent is really critical. And I know that it's right number 8. I want to just say for me, at least, the way that I've always conceived of that right is not that it's imposed on me as a child. If for whatever reason I need space or I want to stop visiting, that's a right that I, as a child of incarcerated parents, should be able to assert, and that I should be supported in asserting, when I choose to, like so many other rights. The right to remain silent. I mean, you can assert that right. But in this case, I think it means that the Adoption and Safe Families Act does far too much damage too quickly to parental bonds. I think it means that when we send, especially in federal prison or really big states like California and Texas, we send people hundreds or thousands of miles away from their communities. When we severely limit visitation options, and create all these hurdles to ongoing communication, those kinds of policies and practices are directly infringing on what I see as this critical essential right. So yeah, I'll stop with that. I could say more about all the rights, but that right to a lifelong relationship, I think, is really critical, because most children, in my opinion, most children with incarcerated parents can benefit from a relationship with their incarcerated parents. And most incarcerated parents, when given the support and the tools, can play a positive role in their children's lives.
Yes, and would any of you like to share y'all favorite right? Well, the right that stand out to you the most and why?
I think for me, they're all important, Echo and Chesa, but I feel like for me and my lived experience that the one that rings out loudest to me is number 7, um, the right to the right to not be judged, blamed, or labeled because my parent is incarcerated. I feel like a lot of the labels that children, including myself, a lot of the labels that we get placed onto us when we have an incarcerated parent really serve as invisible sentences for us as well. So when my father went to prison, I don't feel like I was seen as like just a child of a missing parent. I felt at the time that I was also seen like as a problem waiting to happen. And that label followed me through a lot of the systems that I had went through. So whether that was child welfare or dealing with poverty or school suspension or whatever. That was the label that was placed on me. And I feel like the stigma around parental incarceration, it does fuse with poverty. People don't really just see you as struggling teachers, caseworkers, like even your neighbors. They automatically begin to predict your future and your outcomes instead of like asking you about like what are your dreams, how do you want to move through space, how do you want to take up space. So it's a label, I feel like all of the labels, like at risk, child of a felon, whatever we all know the terminology around a lot of the stigmas that we experience. They led me to going into this like survival strategy of overachievement that I still feel like today that I'm currently trying to like unlearn and think about like how I could ease back, like how I can do things to not like overprove myself and my worth, right? Whether that's like outperforming, trying to like get good grades on your report card or getting scholarships or like pulling together and doing all of the jobs. Like you build a certain type of armor. Um, and I am still unlearning that. So I do think the right number 7 if I had like that framework or any of these frameworks as a young person, I probably would have moved through spaces a little bit differently.
And for me, right number 5, sorry, right, okay, there we go. To speak with, see, and touch my parent, I think that right stands out to me a lot as well. As a child, facing a parent incarceration is like that space of not being around your parent anymore. I know for me, like that moment of not seeing my mother every day and not speaking with her, getting ready for school in the morning, the change in my routine, it definitely was different. And then having to adjust to a different routine. So being able to even speak with my mother or touch my mother would have been something that younger me would have been excited and happy to even if it's like 10 seconds just to hear a good morning or something would have been my inner child would have been happy. Um, and speaking of that, I know there is in the works, Chesa, the Right to Hug campaign. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Absolutely, yeah, I'm thrilled to do that. Thank you for the question. One of the things that I started thinking about when I was in law school and I was studying some of these issues I've been advocating around and that we've been talking about today I've been working on them for many years, and I started to get the tools of a lawyer, and I started to think to myself, all of these lawsuits, all of this litigation that is challenging restrictive visitation policies or phone calls or letters or what have you, is being brought in the name of incarcerated people. And many of these cases are losing because courts are saying that by virtue of their conviction and incarceration, their constitutional rights are restricted and limited, and that they're going to defer to correctional administrators about what is needed to safely run the facility, et cetera. And I started thinking to myself, but these policies restricting visitation are not just infringing the rights of incarcerated people, who, according to the courts, have very diminished constitutional rights. They are also diminishing my rights, your rights, all of our rights when we are children of incarcerated parents. And we have not been accused of or convicted of a crime. Our constitutional rights are not diminished. They're at their zenith. And so I started thinking, why aren't litigators, why aren't lawyers who are bringing these cases, bringing them on behalf of children and family members of incarcerated people rather than the incarcerated people themselves? Wouldn't that be a stronger position to do this kind of legal advocacy? So I started thinking about it. I wrote a law review article, which was published in the Journal of Criminal Law and Criminology about 15 years ago. And I'm really pleased to say that that research and some of my partnerships with public interest organizations has led to a national campaign that you mentioned called Right to Hug. The coalition filed 2 lawsuits in the state of Michigan a little over a year ago, suing sheriff's departments and telecom providers that had, according to the allegations in the lawsuit, conspired to entirely terminate all contact in-person visits and replace them with for-profit video calls. And that campaign has continued to do work in exploring other states where local jails or prisons have really, in most cases, with a for-profit model to get a share of revenue from video calls for which they charge a fee, canceled or severely restricted in-person visiting. And just yesterday, as a matter of fact, the coalition led by, among others, an organization called Public Justice, filed a lawsuit in the state of Colorado suing the Adams County Jail and their telecom partner, a company called HomeWave, for essentially violating what we're calling a constitutional right to hug our parents. And so I'm really excited about that campaign. I'm actively working on exploring similar lawsuits in California and other states. And I'm just thrilled that courageous legal advocates and colleagues of mine have taken up this cause and begun to really put legal pressure on sheriffs and companies that would rather destroy any kind of in-person contact for children whose parents are arrested and accused of crimes, just to make a buck. I think it's a disgrace that companies are willing to do that and that sheriffs go along with it. And it's quite clear to me that it violates our constitutional rights. And I'm thrilled to see courts, for the first time in my lifetime, have to start really engaging with that question of why are our rights being diminished and attacked and violated when we haven't even been accused of a crime.
And I don't know if y'all would like to speak on your experience with visiting, but I know for me, I was pretty young. I don't really remember the whole situation, but I know my mother does tell me like, we did speak about it, how I wanted to hug her. I wanted to stay with her, even though I couldn't. And I was crying just to stay with my mom, even just a little more longer. And I know she said she didn't want to break down in front of me at the moment because of how she know that probably would affect me as well. But when she went back, she was just in tears, how seeing her daughter like not getting the chance to hug or touch her daughter. And that fact that y'all even doing something for that is really amazing.
I'll share a little bit. Thank you for sharing that, Samara. And thank you to Chesa for the work that you're doing right now. It's really important work. For me, so I grew up, my father's side of the family is from the Midwest, Chicago, and my mom is from New York. So I grew up flip-flopping between both places. So the contact that I had with my father was really limited to the time that I had in Chicago. And we took these like long drives from Chicago to Indiana to have these visits. And a lot of the times, some of the times I was turned away or we were turned away because, I don't know, after these long drives for things like me as a young person being inappropriately dressed. But I do know that because of a lot of the policy of that particular prison that I was not able to hug my father until he was released, and I came to Chicago, so that was when I was 18. So I spent a large chunk, about 10 years of my childhood life, like, just not being able to touch him, speaking to him across through a glass, and it was really impactful, and it does still have a ripple effect to today, when I did like finally, or when I was finally able to just like embrace him and give him a hug, like we spent a lot of years trying to rebuild that connection from being separated for so long. And I feel like just being able to do that, even if it would have been for a few minutes, would have helped brace some of that hard impact.
And a follow-up question to that as well. What would you do to improve visiting? Like, what is something that we can do or something that they can implement to improve visiting?
You know, let me jump in and start and answer that, and I'm sure LaTroya will have answers as well. But first of all, the most important thing to remember is we incarcerate too many parents. And so I'm going to talk in a moment about what we can do once people are incarcerated to improve visitation. But the reality is we don't need a lot of these people behind bars. And we can be creative about how we hold people accountable in ways that doesn't require separating parents from their children. When I was San Francisco's elected district attorney, just to give one example, we launched a primary caregiver diversion program so that when parents were arrested and charged with crimes, we didn't need to secure a conviction and send them into custody. We could have other forms of accountability, court supervision, monitoring, including parenting classes, if that was appropriate, to help people get the skills they needed to really be present and engaged in their family life. I think as a society, we incarcerate more people than any other country in the history of the planet. And it's not an effective strategy for making our communities safer. It's not an efficient use of tax dollars. And so the first thing I would say is let's incarcerate fewer parents. Now, what do we do with existing jails and prisons? What do we do to ensure that people who have already been sentenced into custody are able to have meaningful visitation? Well, let me give just a few very concrete examples of things that we can and should do. We should make sure parents are located in facilities that are accessible to the communities that they come from so that there are not geographic barriers. The second thing, video visits and phone call visits should only be a supplement, not a replacement for in-person visits, never a replacement. A third thing we can do is make sure that the physical space in which visitation is occurring is child-friendly, family-friendly. What does that mean? It means having toys. I'll tell you, I did a research project that we published, a 50-state prison visitation policy survey. You can find it online, or we can share the link with people. We found ridiculous policies on the books. The state of New Hampshire had a policy prohibiting any toys in the prison visiting room. Every prison visiting room should have toys. Forget prohibiting them, they should be required. The state of Utah, back when we did this research, had a policy prohibiting languages other than English from being spoken on prison visits. I could keep going. I mean, there are so many policies that just don't make any sense. So we need to get rid of those policies, and we need to encourage and promote family bonding. There are great examples of how to do this and do it well. I was lucky that the prison my mother was incarcerated in during my childhood, Bedford Hills Correctional Facility, at that time had one of the most remarkable visiting programs for kids in the country. They had a nursery for young children born in the prison. They had a children's center within the visiting room that had arts and crafts projects, board games, a carpeted floor, stuffed animals, a story corner with books. These are the kinds of things that we know we can do because it has been done. And it makes a tremendous difference in terms of the bond that children can build and rebuild after it's been severed by incarceration, in terms of the kind of commitment that incarcerated people feel to their family, which helps reduce recidivism once they get released. And in terms of safety and discipline within the prison, because people have a real incentive to not get in trouble while they're incarcerated because they don't want to lose those visits. I'm going to say one last thing, and then I'm going to pass the mic to LaTroya, which is that there are some states like New York that have overnight in-person contact visits. And I was really lucky in my childhood, even into my adulthood, that I was able to go and have really meaningful time with my parents inside their prison beyond just what you can do in a couple hours in a visiting room across the table. We were able to cook together. My parents were able to help me with my homework. They were even able to help talk me down after I had temper tantrums or outbursts the way that kids do. That was a critical role for my parents to play, to learn how to play. And it was critical for me to rebuild trust with them after they'd violated it by getting themselves arrested, to see that they were still committed to doing the work of being my parents. And a lot of that can't be done in a 2-hour visit across the table or through glass. It takes time. Having my parents put me to bed at night, having them make me breakfast in the morning, throw a ball in the front yard inside the prison was critical, and it should be accessible and available to all children with incarcerated parents.
All of that sounds amazing. I would have loved to have, sorry, my son's texting me all. I would have loved to have even like a slither of any of those things. But I do think that just the nature of like the Indiana prison that my father was in, and just a lot of the like really harsh, inhumane rules and regulations kind of also fell on the family. So it fell on me, it fell on my grandmother. Like I would have just loved, honestly, to have a space outside of glass. Like I I'm low maintenance. No, I probably wouldn't have needed toys. Just to have some closer, like non-surveilled conversation with him. Some space to have hugs, some space to talk about private matters. Even for my own like body and physical self to not have been like judged and surveilled as well as if I was I was in prison or whatever. Like I just feel like being treated with a little bit more human dignity, it would have went a long way. So I'm really very, very happy to see all of the initiatives that are taking place currently in order for young people to have different experiences with parents who are currently incarcerated.
I think that was really well said, and that there is a lot that can be done to improve visiting, especially within the wide spectrums of how different prisons treat their inmates, especially like making up their own rules, COs, all that. But for our next question, which of these rights do you think is the most overlooked, and what changes do you want to see in how society treats children with incarcerated parents?
I think right number two is one, the right to be heard when decisions are made about me. I feel like that ripples through like lots of systems where young people don't have the right to like speak or to say how they feel or to be a part of the decisions that are impacting them. Decisions are often like made for young people. and sometimes they're like really harsh, really punitive, and they don't see youth with humanity. So I really feel like that one, we do have like a far way to go for that, like whether it's through like the carceral system, the child welfare system, like thinking about like poverty, like all of the ways that policies, punitive systems affect youth. Young people are not heard enough, and we do need to make space for them to be a part of the decisions that is going to impact them, that are currently impacting them, and is going to continue to have some type of like trajectory for their life moving forward.
I totally agree with that. And I'm going to just, in the interest of talking about a different right, I'm going to focus on the third right. I have a right to be heard and considered when decisions are made about my parent. I think just as someone who's spent a lot of time in a criminal courtroom and participated in a lot of different sentencing proceedings, our legal system does a really good job giving victims a voice. And not to say that, we've solved all those problems for victims, but to say there are formal procedures that allow the judges to listen to victim impact statements, to consider the desires and preferences of victims. You have a Victims' Bill of Rights incorporated into many state constitutions. And yet we don't do that for the family of the person accused of a crime, for the children left behind. Many countries do that. And many other areas of law in the United States also do that. So this is something that the law can do and does do in many instances. I'm going to give two concrete examples of what I mean. Everywhere you look in the United States, all 50 states have a standard that they apply when it comes to all manner of child custody or child welfare proceedings. It's called the best interest of the child standard. It's a legal standard that we use when the government is making decisions about, which parent in a divorce should have custody, or when there's a foster care dispute, or educational issues. All manner of issues are resolved using this best interest of the child standard. Why can't that standard also be incorporated into a judge's decision at sentencing, or a Department of Corrections decision about which facility they're going to house a parent in, or any number of other steps along the way? Similarly, if you look at other countries around the world, many of them do explicitly consider the rights and needs of children who are left behind when a parent's convicted of a crime at the time of sentencing. The South African Constitutional Court, to give a specific example, has held that a child's interests must be considered. Not that they're the only thing that's considered, not that they prioritize over other social considerations, but they have to be part of the conversation. A judge has to explicitly consider the effect of a custodial sentence on children left behind, and a judge should impose the lowest custodial sentence necessary to protect public safety and enforce the law in a way that minimizes the impact on children. That's a constitutional standard that other countries around the world are administering successfully in their courts, and it's something that we ought to really start to do more of in this country.
Thank both of you for your answers. I think that was really good, especially being like we're America, we're supposed to be like this golden country, the country everybody wants to come to, but how is it that other countries are passing these constitutional like standards that are protecting children before America is passing these things that protect our children, especially being that we have so many children with incarcerated parents within this country, and children are just happen to be overlooked. And I think this goes back to right 7 and what's it called? Right number 3, because it's like we need to be considered when decisions are made, and we have the right to not be judged and blamed, because that reduces recidivism. And when children are overlooked within these systems, it increases recidivism, because we're seen as, just because our parent did bad and we don't even know, some cases, because I know in my case my mom wasn't actually convicted of her crime. They just put her there and made her wait months for a trial, but she turned out to be innocent. And even then we still have to pay these crazy amount of bails and do these therapies and wait in them crazy Rikers lines, and it's just not fair to a child. So thank you for that. For our next question, LaTroya, what difference and similarities do you see between the youth you collaborate with and yourself?
Um, Currently, I think the biggest similarity that I see is the landscape, which has not really shifted over time, over decades. So we've all grown up negotiating within these systems that say or claim to be here to help us, but we are often like surveilled and guided to things that don't really support us or feel more punitive. Like we feel like we're being punished by certain things. So I feel like the youth that I currently work with, they mirror that same struggle and just thinking about like how they are moving through the landscape, how the landscape, they remind me that it has not shifted that much over time. So a lot of the work that I do, it does feel really resonant and really important because I am still able to place myself in their shoes and say that I experienced that as well. So they are still like surviving multiple systems at once. Still seeing and they have this paper trail following after them. And they also have certain stigmas and narratives that are following them as well. Many of them are carrying a lot of the labels that I try to and that I'm still trying to escape. So thinking like being labeled as troubled or being labeled as like a hard to reach young person or someone that's like high risk, whatever that means. And when I share my story with them in some of the spaces that I enter, it it's really to help them see that all those labels are lies and that they aren't deficits. And I feel like the difference is that I've had time. So I've had time to access the language and the platforms that many of them are still trying to reach, or some of them don't even know that are accessible to them. So I can name what they're feeling in terms of policy or academic terms. And I hope that when I do work with them that I am like sharing that knowledge because I know what it felt like to live in those spaces and feel helpless. So that's why I really work with young people, because a lot of the times we do share the same story. They may be a little bit different, but the trajectory and the landscape and the systems are still like largely the same. We're just at different chapters. I'm a little bit older. So I really feel like my job within this is for them to help them be able to define what their own personal narratives are and then hopefully lead them to shifting it a little bit sooner.
Okay, thank you. To connect to that question, what does it truly look like to truly share young power with young people?
So I feel like sharing power with young people is also like not deciding what decisions we need to make for them. It's really making space for them to be at the table with you, to make decisions with you because it is their life. I think in a lot of the work that I do with young people, I'm research based. So I teach research in order for young people to be able to decide what questions they feel are the questions that really need to be asked. Like, what is the way that they want to shape data? Like, what is missing out of the narrative? And just really thinking about what are the ways that that should be shared. So the young people that I work with, they co-author our research reports. They facilitate community presentations with us. They shape recommendations for policy. They speak with us to city agencies. So it also is a reminder for me to constantly be checking myself, right? And asking like whether I'm taking space or making space in the right ways. I feel like power sharing work is really a slow, long process. But it is sacred and it can be healing if you do step into it with intention. So I really feel like sharing power with young people, it works to shape like it works to like move them from thinking about themselves from this deficit lens and from these like negative labels that have been placed on them and making them be like full embodied participants within their own lives, within the policies that are shaping their lives, and the main decision makers for the way that they want to be seen.
Thank you, LaTroya. That's beautiful. I have another question for you. I know you mentioned that how you got involved in research. And some youth members want to know how they can connect, um, or excuse me, sorry, are interested in how you can connect advocacy to research.
Um, I feel so the nature of the research that I do, which is youth participatory action research, that's one of them. It's really just being intentional about like why we are collecting data because there's like so much research that's already out there about us. As I mentioned before, so we're already all up in the data. So when we do research, it's really to say, okay, what data's not here, what's missing, and what story do we want to tell differently? And the action part, a part of that epistemology or methodology is really an important part of it. So, thinking about research as a way to gather truth, the advocacy is how you then move those truths that we rewrite into motion. So, it's like, okay, that data was incorrect. This is the real data that's based in young people's real lived experiences, and this is the policy that needs to be shaped from it. So, from that research, we've advocated in Albany. We've advocated at conferences. We've had youth on panels. We have youth speaking in community to other young people and sharing the knowledge and sharing the education. I really do believe that research shouldn't be neutral. Like it shouldn't just you gather the data and then you write a report and you leave it there. That it is participatory. It should be. It is political, but then it's also personal if you are in it and you have lived experience within it. So a lot of the youth, all of the youth that I work with, they aren't subjects of this research. They are co-researchers with me. They are co-storytellers, and we collect our data not to diagnose them or any of the people who have the experiences, but to diagnose the system and then translate some of those findings into like actionable like policy recommendations, campaigns, public testimonies, whatever we feel the action is needed for from that comes birth from the research.
Thank you. This is such amazing and important work that y'all both doing. Y'all are some trailblazers, and I'm honored to be speaking with you. A question for the both of you now. I know advocating it can be draining and emotional. What advice do you have for young advocates to help with that?
It definitely draining and emotional, definitely lots of obstacles put in your path. And I would just I would just say to anybody going through it, like there's a lot of people out there with you, and you may feel alone, you may feel isolated, but there are millions of us, and you stand on the shoulder of giants. There are people who come before you who have survived what you were going through and who have come out of it stronger and who have made a massive impact. And you can do the same. And so remember to just keep putting one foot in front of the other, to keep working hard, to keep being proactive and assertive, to keep demanding that your rights be respected, and to believe in yourself, most of all.
I think for me, a big part of the work that I do is healing work. So as I mentioned earlier, like a lot of the coping strategies around the way that I labeled ended up in this like overachievement aspect that I am learning how to put down right now. So just thinking about alongside the work that I'm doing in the advocacy spaces that I land in, it is very heavy. And sometimes it doesn't feel like it's time to put things down. But over time, I'm really learning that in order for me to show up for young people, in order for me to be here fully and avoid burnout, I need to take a moment to rest, to breathe, to trust that I can be soft in order to be whoever the person is, the person that I need to be in these advocacy spaces. So I really am very intentional alongside my advocacy and making time to meditate and do yoga and journal and learn herbalism, have quiet time. Sometimes I crochet. Sometimes I'll crochet in a meeting. Sometimes I color, whatever. And I hope that young people are seeing that, okay, LaTroya is on the lines with us, but she also takes time to breathe and to rest and to vacation without guilt. I think that guilt is something that I'm also trying to put down. Like it's okay to take care of myself. I think hopefully if nobody takes anything from me is that you can do this work and you can also take care of yourself. Because it's a part of the work. It's not a break from it.
A question that was posed by someone in the chat is, how do you feel about incarcerated parents attending virtual parent meetings? Do you know any policies to support this?
If I understand the question, I think I understand the question. This is something that we definitely did do and support at various times in San Francisco County Jail with incarcerated parents. There will be a number of instances, and as we've talked about, a lot of parents are incarcerated for long periods of time without even being convicted, because they can't afford cash bail or because a judge has denied them bail, but they are still presumed innocent by the law. Really important that they still be able to play a role in supporting their children. And so doing virtual parent meetings with, parent teacher conferences, for example, or with foster care parents, or depending on the particular circumstances where many jails don't allow, unfortunately, as we've talked about, don't allow contact visits. I think it's really important that kids, again, going back to the Bill of Rights, that kids have the right to a lifelong relationship with their parent. And that includes multiple different forms of contact, letters, phone calls, in-person visits. And it also includes the parents, when possible and appropriate, being allowed to participate in big decisions about the children's life, a move to a new family or a new school. So as a general rule, I feel good about that.
Alrighty, thank you. And to close us out today, what message would you give to a young person with an incarcerated parent? And this goes for everyone.
Personally, a message that I would give out to a young person with an incarcerated parent is that it gets better and that it's not your fault and it's not your parents' fault and that you have to keep moving because like one thing that I felt really bad for my mom when she was inside because I just felt like, dang, like she in there and it's kind of like when you're inside, you're stagnant. The world moves without you and the world moves very fast and it's not going to wait for you. So, especially as a child, you have to know that the world isn't going to wait for you to grieve or get over whatever's going on in your life. You can't stop whatever you're doing just because your parent is incarcerated because it's up to you to make them proud and to even avenge what the system is putting them through because we have to remember that we are living in a country where the system was quite literally built against us. We have slave catchers turned police officers that are purposely trying to target minorities. And if we give up on ourselves and give up on our family and loved ones inside, then we are giving in to exactly what the system wants us to do. Thank you.
My message to young folks who are dealing with having a parent that is incarcerated is to reach out for support and know who to and not to talk to about it because some folks just aren't going to be helpful or supportive. But there are groups out there specifically for young folks who are dealing with this, like the Osborne Foundation, and there are supports out there for you.
To add on, I definitely agree. My tip would definitely be you're not alone in that are people out there, there's organizations and support groups like SUSU, and there are other people. You're not the only one facing this, unfortunately, and there are others out there. And like Marley said, that not everyone needs to know your business because there are people that will take that and use it against you or stuff of that sort. But definitely finding the right people to share and open up with because they can give you tips on how they overcome it. I know during like our SUSU Youth Team meeting, there's stuff that I learned as well. And there's stuff that I may not have crossed my mind to overcome what I've dealt with my parents' incarceration, but sharing my obstacles and how I overcome it can help another youth. And that's what this is all about, helping one another to get over this. This is something that definitely can hurt you. And you're sometimes, especially for me, my right away was like kind of shut down and not open up to others, but there are people there. And You just gotta reach your hand out and look for the support because there are people willing to support you.
I love all of those messages. I think for me, I would say, if I could say one thing, I have lots of things to say, but you can choose your story and reject the ones that do not serve you, that do not fit the narrative that you want for yourself. I feel like liberation from that is the long work. So freeing yourself from the labels, the systems, and all the stories that tell you who you can be or who you should be. Liberation, I feel, is the word that holds all the others. So justice and dignity and belonging and love, and you can reject all of the things that don't fit within that.
You all said it perfectly. I don't really have anything to add. I'll just say, +1 to all of that, and we see you and we support you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. With that being said, thank you to our guests and all of you for joining us today. To all the young people out there, we see and support you. Visit the SUSU website to connect with resources, hear our stories, find tips from young people, and more. If you have any creative skills, you still have time to enter the SUSU Art Contest at www.susu-osborne, which is osborne.org. Enter by Friday. And don't forget to follow us, see us, support us on Instagram and TikTok. Thank you.